decades, and also happens to be a lawyer and a musician. I will tell you, his musician skills are pretty good, but he's even a better lawyer. And he practices out in North Richland Hills, and he basically has a business transaction practice and probate. So it kind of gives us a little bit of a bent on the business aspect and the employer aspect of it. And we just kind of wanted to visit with you. Kent, won't you introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about you?
Kent Davis, glad to be here today. I've been a lifelong resident in Northeast Tarrant County and have been fortunate to have a relationship with Brad and the Parker Law Firm over the last number of years. And we're going to demonstrate probably very capably what we don't know today, Brad. I think there's so many questions between the state government and the federal government and our local authorities and cities and counties that we're going to really be exposed for what's going on, because it's kind of crazy out there right now.
Well, it is. And the 5 things that I wanted to talk about briefly, then we'll hopefully have some time to do a little question and answer afterwards. But the 5 things I wanted to talk about today is first, just the general parameters of the governor's orders. Then we'll move over to, which orders prevail, because there's a whole host of different orders going on out there. We got city orders, county orders, state orders. And then what precautions, number 3, what precautions do employers need to take or businesses need to take? And then employees, what precautions do they all need to take in order to open up? Then, of course, I've seen a lot of questions about what if the employees don't feel safe? What happens to them if they don't want to go back to work as quickly as their employer? Or should they get sick? What happens? Can they still apply for unemployment? Can they qualify for workers' comp? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then lastly, I want to talk about business liability and the big push going on at the federal level to immunize businesses for any COVID-19 faux pas, if you will. So with that, Kent, why don't we take it from the top here with the general parameters of the governor's orders? You know, the thing that strikes me is that it was, according to all the maps that I had seen and all the calculations, Texas was not going to enter into its peak until this week or early next week. And yet we are going ahead and implementing phase 1 of reopening Texas and getting businesses back up and running. Thoughts on that? I mean, I don't want to get political here. I just want to make some observations.
Sure. I know business owners are very anxious about the lost revenue because we're all losing money on a daily basis. But the thing that I've studied and read the most in the last few weeks is that it's all about the testing, and more testing. And how do we know these numbers are correct when we've only tested a small segment of the population? So we're thinking that we have a handle on these numbers, or the governor has a handle on these numbers, but we really don't know when you've got the immunity tests and you've got the other tests about, who has active virus and are they able to spread it down the road. So we're basing a lot of decisions on numbers that we just don't know if we can trust or not.
Well, and that's true. And unfortunately, I guess, the governor's going to roll out phase 2, or at least address it on May 18th, which will be about 2 weeks after opening it up on last Friday. And, it's going to be interesting to see what those numbers say at that point in time, because you don't know whether or not the increase, if there is an increase, is due to the reopening and mingling, or if it's just because more tests have become available by that time. And you hear everybody talk about from numbers to look at what percentage of those tested have turned positive. What are the number of hospital beds? What are the number of respirators available? What are, what? So I don't know. All I know is that we're in it, and the businesses are allowed to open. And let me just take a minute to kind of go through that, just so it's clear.
Sure.
First and foremost, the governor's order says that they still recommend social distancing and avoiding crowds and limiting physical contact. And so I suspect that's probably why barbershops, salons, massage parlors, gyms, and those kinds of places aren't getting open right now. Face coverings are not required or mandatory, but they're highly recommended in situations which you cannot maintain social distancing of at least 6 feet. One of the things he's put in there is that he wants to increase contact tracing, and he has hopes to add 1,000 people by April 27th. I'm not sure he made that number, and he hopes to add another 4,000 people for contact tracing by May 11th. And everything I say, that's not going to happen. That can't happen that fast. I hope it does, obviously. All restaurants and other businesses that are non-essential have been given permission to open, other than the ones I just mentioned, as long as they don't exceed 25% of their occupancy. The one other addition, or I guess clarification to that, should be bars can't open, the 51% rule. If you run an establishment that the liquor sales are more than 51% of sales, then you can't open. And again,
Speak a minute while you're talking about the bars. Speak a minute about, we're going to get to it a little bit later in the 5 points, but the enforcement with bars, the discussion we had a little bit earlier today about who would.
Yeah. We'll come back to that. But, bars run a big risk by opening up right now. And they could have a long-term serious consequences of that. And we will talk about that in just a minute more. It's interesting that museums, libraries, movie theaters can reopen. You can have non-contact outdoor sports of no more than 4, i.e. golf courses. Places of worship can reopen as long as there's 6 feet social distancing. And no valet service. I thought that was kind of interesting. You can go to your favorite restaurant, but you got to park the car yourself. Anyway, that's kind of it in a nutshell of what happens. What I did find interesting, though, is in the order, it's written that the rural counties, if they have less than 5 confirmed cases, can go ahead and increase that number from 25% occupancy to 50% occupancy. So in Podunk, West Texas, or somewhere where you don't have anything going on, the local officials can, and I can say Podunk, West Texas, because I'm from Lubbock,
Absolutely.
So in any event, so they can do that there. So that's kind of the groundwork of what we're working with. And like the governor said, he's going to come back on May 18th and reevaluate this after he sees the numbers. And I'm not sure what numbers he's going to be looking at, but whatever those numbers are, and make a decision on whether or not to bump it up fully open, 50% open, draw back down, keep it the same. Who knows? But he's certainly getting a lot of political pressure, both within and without the party, as well as just general business people and employees and everybody in general to do something or do nothing. I mean, I'm sure he's under, I'm not his biggest fan, but I'm sure he's under incredible pressure.
I can't imagine. Economy, a population, diverse as Texas, with the populated counties of Dallas, Tarrant, Harris, Bear, Travis, trying to apply rules that apply to those counties, but they may not apply to Brewster County. And I think we both saw a webinar last week talking about how do you forecast what's happening when you got the microclimates. I mean, if it's raining in Tyler, doesn't mean it's raining in El Paso. You've got to be able to figure out what rules and regulations apply to a particular geographical area. I think that letting the smaller counties have a little more leeway makes sense because they're not a hot spot. But you take a hot spot like Dallas, that's probably Dallas and Harris have been the 2 hottest counties in Texas. You've got to use that common sense and try to respect what's going on with business. But you have cases in the hundreds per day that have been coming up.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue as to what orders do prevail, because as we all know, Dallas and Harris County particularly had more stringent requirements and procedures in place than what the governor's order has. And he, of course, has toned that back and said, my orders apply. They can't be usurped by any city or county. And from my understanding, Kent, Dallas rolled it back a little bit, but was encouraging to, even though my order doesn't stand, continue to comply with it. Let's be sensible and stuff. So, but you started on with the TABC, and this goes, who enforces compliance? This is the number 2 point. Won't you take that?
Well, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission has a large enforcement wing on the sale of alcohol in bars, and they have a past history of liking to be the police in those regards. And they're going to be the ones that can have long-term detrimental effects on a bar owner who says, we've been seeing this stuff about the stockyards and what's going on down there, and we're going to have a bar crawl for freedom. Well, you might have the TABC crawling right along with you to cite you, and they can even go to a license revocation in those things. So there is teeth for bar owners and restaurants who have bars. If they're not complying, that's who they'd have to look to, the TABC, and those folks, they don't generally mess around.
No, they don't. And liquor licenses are hard to come by, and you don't want to lose that. And in fact, I saw over the weekend that one of the bars, I guess the only one that opened up in Tarrant County, either code enforcement, Fort Worth code enforcement either closed it down, or the TABC, probably a little bit of both. And then I also saw that the Katy Trail Ice House in Dallas opened up one day, and then the TABC came in and suggested that they go ahead and close, and they promptly did. But that's going to be a real pickle for the bars that want to get back open, and I understand. I get what they're going through, but they sure need to be careful about how they do that. And then also just the local restaurants and other places, code enforcement can issue citations. And these citations can be expensive, and they need to be careful. I mean, I think there's a tendency for people to think that because reopening started last Friday, this thing's over. And it's not by any stretch of the imagination.
I think one thing, Brad, that illustrates in your outline on what orders prevail is the split between Harris County and the city of Houston about wearing masks. There's an order that you have to wear a mask out in public, and one of the officials down there came out with the ruling that if you don't wear a mask, you're subject to a $1,000 fine. And everybody's going, whoa, wait a minute. I understand it's important to wear a mask, but you might be exceeding your local authority on something like that. So
yeah,
we have more questions as our guests on the webinar today have as many questions. We have just as many as they do, because there's just things we don't know. They're fascinating legal arguments that are in every aspect of this pandemic.
Well, in talking about masks for a minute, I think that one of the things that really struck me is Governor Cuomo, who I personally find it fascinating. I think he's done a great leadership job. But he was talking about masks the other day, and we're not wearing masks to protect ourselves. The masks really don't do anything to keep you from getting corona or the COVID-19. What their purpose and designed for is to protect other people. And really, you need to be thinking about it as it's a sign of respect to your fellow citizen and your neighbors by taking the mask and wearing it in those grocery stores or crowded spots where you can't maintain 6 feet, to protect their health, to help them. Because if you sneeze or cough or something, that's what the mask is really supposed to be doing. It's not to, and I know I walk into Kroger and I feel silly, but then I keep thinking back in my mind, I'm protecting that guy or that woman, not myself. And that's what you really need to concentrate on.
There was a cartoon about that in the paper over the weekend, Star Telegram, Dick Collier cartoon, where it had a cowboy with a mask and a gun and a holster, and it said 1880 over the top of it, and then it showed the same thing, open carry with a mask over his face, and it said 2020. What's changed in Texas?
People are always going, okay, now we're going to reopen, but what precautions? This is number 3. What precautions do employees and employers and businesses need to take? And there's a ton of stuff out there. And I saw today that there's a big push. They really want OSHA to come out with some guidelines, some uniform guidelines. I don't anticipate that's going to happen. But what I have seen, there are some really pretty basic things. Train all employees on appropriate cleaning and disinfection. Screen your employees. Find out where they've been for the last 6 weeks. What are they doing? Who's in their life? How are they sick? Do they have older people living at home? then follow protocols, about returning employees. Set up protocols for your business. Who's going to wear gloves, masks? How are you going to disinfect? Routine cleaning, disinfectant, sanitizer readily available for everybody. Signage reminding everyone of the protocols. Those are just some basic things. What have you seen other than that, Kent?
I think if you are having people come to your office for anything, there's a lot of challenges we run a title operation and do a lot of wills and estates. And, wills require witnesses to sign in the presence. So we've postponed a lot of that. But going forward, we're going to have to keep an accurate log of everybody who was in our office. So if anybody was exposed, we have the tracing capabilities to show who we were in contact with and what that looks like. And just reminding every one of the protocols and what we're trying to accomplish. Most of the people who have come through our offices in the last few weeks everybody's very conscious and very respectful of the situation. There are masks. Some folks are comfortable wearing gloves. One of my employees that does the closings has done some drive-in closings. It's like the car will come up out in front and she'll go out with gloves and a mask and 2 clipboards, and people will actually sign their closing documents in front of her and notary while they're still in their car, which was pretty creative and is not something I'd seen in my 34 years of doing this.
Yeah. And, if anybody on the call, I got a pamphlet from Cushman and Wakefield, who is a real estate service firm, and they were put together some guidelines on what they would recommend. And it kind of depends on the type of business that you have, kind of laying out a protocol that's already kind of written up and stuff. And as we will talk about in a minute, if you are a business and you are going to reopen, I couldn't recommend highly enough that you have written protocols in place to guide your employees, how you're going to handle the public, and how you're going to continue disinfecting and sanitizing the work area, because there is some repercussions to it, or potential repercussions to it. We'll talk about here in a second. But, the business is open, Kent. And so that means the employees have to come back. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, most people want to get back to work. And I hear people say, well, it may be cheaper for them to stay at home. That's hogwash. Most people want to get back to work, I think. And but what if they honestly don't believe that it's safe, or that their employer's not taking the right precautions? I mean, what's the ramifications from your understanding for the employees if they don't want to go back?
I think it's fluid. I think there's still decisions with the unemployment or the workers' compensation and what that's going to look like. And I think it's a valid concern of an employee. They need to go back to the previous topic about what precautions are employers and businesses taking. And is the employer meeting those requirements? Are they checking temperatures? Are they checking sanitizers and getting what they want? I saw one question come up on our screen from one of the listeners is talking about, well, what if you can't find the wipes and the disinfectants? I know there's a simple recipe for sanitizers that involve hydrogen peroxide and a little bit of alcohol, and you can mix it yourself, and you can see those on YouTube. But the supply chain is starting to catch up. We're starting to see paper towels and things back in the stores. So I would think that the sanitizers or the wipes or the bleaches are going to be out there, because we're going to have them to open businesses.
Well, yeah, and if you don't have them and you're a business, don't reopen. I mean, it's just that simple. You cannot reopen if you're not prepared to and have the ability to carry forward the protocols, because you're subjecting your employees and the public in general to devastating effects. And I would just highly advise anybody, do not open them unless you have the supplies. But I went on the website for TEC, the Texas Employment Commission, to see if they had come up with any temporary guidelines for unemployment claims. And they said that if you have been, because part of the opportunity to be on unemployment means that you will take any kind of full-time employment that might come back your way. And so many people are going to have the ability to go back to work, but if they're concerned about something that, they're just not comfortable with it, can they still receive their unemployment? And there were a few categories that say you can still not return to work and collect your unemployment if you're over 65, if you have a member of your household who is over 65, that you may be able to get away with not going back, or you've been diagnosed with COVID by a source authorized by the state of Texas and you have not recovered from it yet. That's kind of a no-brainer. Family member with COVID, a quarantine individual, you for whatever, you've had to be quarantined for 14 days because you came in contact with somebody. Or here's the interesting one, I thought, childcare, because child school and daycares are closed and no alternatives are available. Now that's going to apply to a lot of people. And the TEC is going to take these on a case-by-case basis, evaluating the excuses and the reasons why people aren't returning to work, if that's the case. So you want to be sure and have your ducks in a row, so to speak, to document it, to show that. But, these schools aren't reopening, and parents don't have daycare. Daycares aren't taking kids back for the most part. Although I did hear today that some daycares are open for children of essential workers only, i.e. doctors, firemen, police officers, those kinds of things. But if you're just a lawyer or person in my office, I don't think I'm considered an essential employer. But you're just going to have to be very, very careful and make sure you cross the T's and dot the I's and document it appropriately. And the other big question, I think, is workers' comp. As you alluded to, Kent, I don't know what's going on with comp, and I haven't been able to find anything yet. But I know we've got a lot of lawyers on this call. My guess is if there's a way for comp to be denied, it will be denied.
That seems to be the history.
Yeah, why change now?
Yeah.
And the thing is, and this is going to kind of come in a minute too, but the thing is that it's going to be really difficult to prove how you got the COVID. And for workers' comp, it has to be a work-related injury. And so, your conduct and behavior is going to be questioned intently. Where did you go? What other places were you frequenting? And so I don't know. I'm really curious to see how that goes. But, in talking about that, I saw today in the paper that the new hot spot in Texas seems to be Amarillo. And that's because of the meatpacking plants up there. They right now have, in Potter County, they have a 5.66 per 1,000 test positive rate, which is 4 times higher than Dallas. And then Moore County, which is just north of Amarillo, which has the JBS beef plant there, they have 16.65 people out of every 1,000 who are tested positive. So that's extraordinarily high. And the Trump administration is using the Defense Production Act to require many meat processing plants to go back into service. And in fact, they sent an emergency crew or emergency evaluators, whatever you want to call them, to Amarillo to evaluate what's going on at JBS. I mean, there's a real dilemma there. I mean, we need our meat, we need the food supply, but you've got that kind of infection rate.
Yeah, and we did get a question or a comment from our caller, Bill Honecker. Bill, thanks for listening to the webinar today about how do you know where these numbers are and if they're accurate? And the answer is we don't. We don't. If we're testing 1% and the numbers are based on testing of 1%, the mathematics indicate that it has to be higher. There has to be more cases out there than we know about. And we're just trying to base it off the best we can until they get the testing numbers up. So I would suppose that in the case in Amarillo, in Potter County, that the government would be forcing additional tests out there so they can test a greater number of the population and see what the true number is. But that's one of the biggest problems about this disconnect on this whole pandemic is the disconnect between the science and the politics, and the disconnect about we're all, for the first time in history, experiencing a pandemic from this real-time news channels and information we have on our phones and internet, and we're just getting overloaded with it. And it's what numbers that you can believe. That's one of the biggest challenges for us as citizens in this whole thing. What's true and what's not?
Yeah. And and the cost of being wrong can be extremely high, especially you have older or susceptible people in the household or your family. And
76% of the deaths are those that are over 65.
Yeah, I saw. You said 76%.
That's what it says in the outline. Yeah,
Yep, it was. So, well, the last thing I want to talk about before we take any more questions, though, is the liability and immunity. Of course, I'm a personal injury attorney, and I hear this all the time: tort reform. The trial lawyers are going to litigate us to death. We need immunity from this. We need immunity from that. And so there's a big push right now to give immunity to businesses that open back up. And in fact, that's the next big fight that we're going to see between the Senate and the House at the national level, is that the Senate wants to impose on the new stimulus bill that they're talking about rolling out next, a widespread or blanket immunity for businesses in general who reopen, and keep them from being sued by the employees or the public who may contract COVID. And the House, of course, is completely against it. As I heard someone say, I think Schumer said, the Senate wants to protect companies, we want to protect workers. Look, there's legitimate arguments to be made on both sides, but the problem with any immunity at any time is that you are now condoning the bad conduct of the bad actors. And, it's like having a little kid who you tell him, Johnny, don't ride your bike in the street. Well, if there's no consequence, if you don't ground him, take the bike away or spank him, he's going to continue to ride that bike in the street. And that's the same way with business in general. They are there to make money. And if they don't have an incentive to abide by the rules, many businesses won't. Many businesses, of course, will. Most of them probably will. They're good, honorable, honest businesses. But for those people that don't, you can't just give them immunity to this stuff.
We might as well give the fox the key to the hen house, because there will be people that will manipulate those rules and bend them and break them. And there's a great question from Carmen Johnson on one of our listeners, talking about sick workers at meat plants continue to work and someone in Tarrant County becomes infected. Is there some liability possibilities? And that ties in with exactly what you're talking about. We don't know. But the causation and how you get to that, coming from tainted meat that was processed by somebody who was infected with the virus, how do we know that there's huge chain of custody issues with that kind of stuff.
In causation, and that's exactly right. The legal process itself will ferret out the valid claims from the invalid claims, because causation is a huge deal. It's just like a foodborne illness. Unless you've got the food, you can never prove that you got food poisoning at that restaurant that you went to, because you just can't. And I can hear the defense attorney in a case that might be brought, well, where did you go grocery shop? Did you get your car washed? When did you go get your hair cut? Who else did you see? Did you have your neighbors over? All these questions of different places that you could pick up the virus. Now, of course, if a business is not having any written protocols, has no kind of policies or procedures in place, it might be a little easier to prove some type of circumstantial causation. But at the end of the day, the court system, at least the court system I'm familiar with in Texas, is going to have a pretty high standard and burden for a plaintiff to prove causation. And I don't see, anybody can sue anybody for anything, okay? It's always been that case. That doesn't make it successful, and that doesn't mean it's going to happen a lot. But I know that I've evaluated this with some of my other trial lawyer friends, and I'm not seeing it. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be some suits. I just don't see it being successful. And if you're really are responsible, what do you have to worry? Let's go forward and be responsible and not irresponsible.
Issues on just things that maybe aren't on our 5 points, but just to keep your eye on in the next few weeks. as the property valuations come out on the taxes on our real estate, what
Got mine today.
valuation is going to look like, and what they're going to then try to do with the rates. And there's some provisions in the taxation codes about how the cities can manipulate those rates in time of difficulties. And there's going to be things we have to look at in that. The shortfalls in budgets of the cities with their sales tax revenues, to cities that are heavy in sales tax revenue, how are they going to do that to pay for their essential services? I mean, they're losing money right and left, just like everybody else. For instance,
States as well.
The city of North Richland Hills, where I live and work, they have furloughed their employees like for a certain number of Fridays over the next few weeks. You're not working this Friday, and you're not getting paid this Friday. It's a way to try to get their budgets under control. And the school districts will be doing the same thing. Colleges and universities, when do they get to open back up? What does the tuition look like? What about the refunds from people who got kicked out of the dorms? I have a senior at the University of Texas. There's no graduation. And we're going to send you a diploma in the mail and wish you all the best. Hook 'em horns. So you've got, there's so many things. I saw where Brewer High School was going to try to have a commencement at some point that was going to be at the Texas Motor Speedway, so they could have plenty of space and still be able to hand out diplomas. But so much pressure on the leaders of the school districts, the leaders of the cities, the leaders of the counties with what's going to happen to the tax revenues and the property taxes. Are there going to be a deaf ear in the months ahead where we're going to get our property taxes one way or another, and people are suffering? And we just got a lot of issues that we can't even cover in a 40-minute webinar. But as Texans, it's something we're all going to need to look and be thinking about in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I'm on the HEB ISD School Board Foundation, and we had a meeting today and heard from both the Tarrant County Community College representative as well as HEB. And they've got three scenarios going on. The first is we start in the fall. The second is we don't start in the fall. We've got to go on like we are. And the third scenario is we start in the fall, but the second round comes around and knocks us out by November. So, I mean,
fascinating.
It is just incredibly fascinating. It gave me some comfort. They're at least thinking about these things, and
Sure.
cooler heads are prevailing there. One last thing I wanted to say about legislation and the immunity deal is that many states have already passed it. And I think 14 or 15, the last count I saw, they're doing it at the state level. Now, unless Texas calls a special session, there won't be anything happening at the state level from a legislative standpoint until at least the next session, which begins in January of 2021. But this federal level could play a part in that. But I don't know. You raise a great point, Kent. There is so much more that we don't know, and what's going to happen on May 18th is anybody's guess.
Right, and we've been waiting on the courts to open back up for our practice, and it's just a logjam. And once they open back up, and there's orders coming down about doing hearings remotely via this Zoom process or whatever, but do the counties have the budget to have the right equipment to do what they're supposed to be doing? We're constantly reminded every day of how closely connected we are as a society with everything that's going on. And it just, one pickup stick makes the rest of them fall down. And it's something that I never thought Brad, we're the same age, we would see in our lifetime some of the things we've looked at in the last 6 weeks.
Well, it'll change how we progress from this point forward. But, you're talking about the court system. Somebody had sent a question in earlier, Anya, and, what is this going to do to the jury pool? And I think it's going to do the same thing to the jury pool as what it's doing to the restaurants. Just because all these restaurants are opening up, or a lot of them are, people aren't coming back. And if you look at the studies in Wuhan, people are not coming back. They are not leaving their apartments. They are still social distancing and not reintegrating into large crowds. And I suspect we're going to see the same thing with the jury system for a while. We're going to have no shows like nobody's business
Right,
on that.
and you're not going to be able to cite them because it's a founded belief that there's a problem in large groups in that area. Um,
Yeah.
that's going to be amazing.
Well, Kent, I really appreciate you jumping on with us. Kayla, do we have any questions that we haven't answered? Do we need to take up?
No, you guys, Kent was seeing a couple of them roll through as he was talking, so he addressed those, I think, in really great spots. I don't have any more here on the webinars.
I saw one more. Can a business require masks to be worn without providing them? Yeah, my answer to you is yes. I think a business can do that. However, if you're not providing them, then you're going to be turning away a lot of people because there's a lot of people that don't have masks. I think wearing a mask is much like no shirt, no shoes, no service. No mask, no service. And I think a business owner has the right to do that. Absolutely.
One other thought I had about today, about the webinar today, is that we're talking about businesses like mine who have 5 employees or you have 10 employees. But one of the things we did see on the webinar from Mr. Mickelson out of Miami that we watched, you and I watched a couple of weeks ago, was larger businesses. And if you say you had 60 employees, is they're going to a work week where they're rolling 20 in at a time. So 20 people may work on Monday, another 20, a different 20 on Tuesday, a different 20 on Thursday, and then just rotate their workforce in that way to keep their numbers down and their distancing where they're at. I was looking at the list, and that's something that I remember.
Well, that reminds me of one more thing I wanted to say is that what are we doing? You mentioned that you're adapting, that your office is kind of open, but you've adapted. We've decided just to shut it down. We have been very fortunate in being able to work remotely. We have Carrie, who is our front desk person, comes in every day that's what she likes to do. And she's there by herself and she checks the mail, makes sure everything's running right, nobody's broken in overnight. But, and I'll go up there every now and then and yell at her across the office. But my team is working from home and we plan on continuing to do that. It's been really successful so far. And we haven't really missed a lick from that standpoint. Everybody's been productive. Everyone seems committed. It's been really enjoyable from that standpoint. And I've just got no intent whatsoever to bring my folks back or even ask them to come back until we get another 30 days down this line. It's just not worth it.
Well, agreed. And that's what everybody's working from home. I'm the only one up here at the office on a daily basis. I'm kind of like Carrie. I'm checking to make sure nothing was stolen or broke in. And then if they need to come in for a particular task, they just kind of let me know and we space it out and deal with it accordingly. The biggest challenge is our closings to get people to sign up. And then we're sanitizing and masking and all that stuff. But it's
I like the idea of the car, drive through
closings. So give a free Sonic with it or something.
Yeah, I can just see someone in their car with 18,000 documents trying to sign them all.
Yeah, interesting on the closings too. So some people that we signed up last week, the lenders are so backed up, where we would usually fund a transaction the next day or the same day. It's taken the lenders 5 or 6 days to get their ducks in a row before they can fund transactions. So that creates some interesting business issues going forward when they start collecting their interest and things that they're doing on their mortgages.
Well, we're going to see a lot more of those. Anything else, Kaylin, that we?
No, I think y'all addressed most of the questions as they came in, which was good, putting them in.
And if anybody's got some questions, you're welcome to email me, brad@parkerlawfirm.com. If you want a copy of this for business reopening, be happy to provide it to you. Have some other protocols that people have come up with. I'm not vouching for the efficacy or legitimacy of them, but there's a bunch out there. And I would highly recommend that if you are a business and you are going to reopen, you better have some written protocols in place, not only to protect yourself from any potential liability down the line, but to give the confidence to both your employees and the public that you know what the heck you're doing and that you're being a responsible business person and doing the best you possibly can to protect your employees and to protect the public in general.
Absolutely. And if there's anything that I can answer or try to expound on, or you have questions about probates or wills and estates or real estate closings, you can reach me at kent@dkdavislaw.com. So that's kent@dkdavislaw.com. And that's the website as well. So thanks for the opportunity, Brad and Kaylin.
Hey,
good job.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and what I'll do for all of you guys who joined, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to Brad and Kent and hope they were able to answer some of your questions and concerns. But as they mentioned, if you have any other questions or anything like that, I'll be sending out this webinar. We've recorded it, so I'll send that out to all of you guys as a recap if you want to look back on it or share it with anybody. And I'll also include their emails for you as well if you'd like to send over any questions or anything like that.
Thank you, Kaylin. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining
Bye.
us, guys. Bye.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
For more information about the legal process and your rights, download our free book at parkerlawfirm.com.